My father ordered me to tell the police. You were driving that night, so take the charge. After my brother crashed his car and I finally said, check the hospital records because I was getting surgery while he was behind the wheel. I did not realize how serious my family was about making me take the blame until my father showed up at my apartment, before I had even had breakfast, and told me I needed to go to the police station with a very specific story. He had already decided what had happened, what I was supposed to say, and what consequences I was expected to accept. The only problem was that his version of events was physically impossible. That was the part I kept thinking about in the first hour after he left. It was not just that I knew I had not been driving my brother's car that night. I knew exactly where I had been. I had been lying under bright hospital lights with Enrollment 4 in my arm while a surgical team was preparing me for an emergency procedure. I had paperwork proving it. I had timestamps proving it. I had nurses, doctors, medication records, admission records, and a hospital wristband that I still had in a drawer because I had not gotten around to throwing it away. And somehow my father was standing in my apartment telling me that I needed to take responsibility for a crash I could not possibly have caused. What made it worse was that I did not initially understand why. I knew my younger brother had wrecked his car. I knew he had been scared. I knew my father was upset. I even knew my brother had been drinking earlier that evening because he admitted that much to me the next morning. What I did not know was that my father had spent the night trying to turn a family problem into my problem. I am in my 30s, and I had always been the person in my family who tried to keep things calm. I was not the favorite son. I was not the problem son either. I was usually the person people called when something needed to be handled without a lot of drama. My mother used to joke that I was the family emergency contact even when nobody had officially made me one. I paid my bills on time. I kept copies of important documents. I rarely got into arguments. I had never been arrested. I had never had a DUI. I had never even gotten a speeding ticket. My brother was different. He was younger than me by a few years, and for most of our childhood I thought his impulsiveness was just part of being younger. As adults, though, the difference became harder to explain away. He changed jobs frequently. He borrowed money and sometimes forgot to pay it back. He had a habit of putting off boring responsibilities until they became emergencies. My parents always seemed to have a reason for why he was struggling. He was stressed. He was trying to figure his life out. He had bad luck. His girlfriend had been difficult. His boss had treated him unfairly. There was always a reason. There was almost always somebody else to blame. And because I did not cause problems, I became the person my parents expected to absorb the problems. The night my brother crashed his car started with something completely unrelated. I had been having abdominal pain for several hours. At first, I thought it was food poisoning or some stomach bug. I had eaten dinner at home, cleaned up the kitchen, and tried to go to bed early because I had work the next morning. Instead, the pain got worse. By around 10 o'clock, I was pacing around my apartment because lying down made it more uncomfortable. I called my mother because I was not sure whether I was overreacting. She told me I should probably go to urgent care or the emergency room if the pain became severe. That advice turned out to be correct. I drove myself to the hospital because I still thought I was being dramatic. I remember being embarrassed at the front desk because I was trying to explain where the pain was while also convincing myself it was probably nothing. They took my information. They checked my blood pressure and temperature. They took blood. They did imaging. Eventually, a doctor came back and told me I needed emergency surgery. I honestly thought there had been a mistake. I remember asking how urgent it really was because I had work in the morning. The doctor looked at me in a way that made it obvious work was no longer the important thing. I called my mother and told her what was happening. She sounded frightened. She said she was coming. I told her not to drive if she was too upset and that I would update her. At some point after midnight, I was moved to a preoperative area. I had Enrollment 4. I had changed into a hospital gown. A nurse had gone over the procedure. A consent form had been signed. My phone battery was low, and I remember putting it on the little rolling table next to the bed. I sent my brother a text telling him I was having surgery. He responded almost immediately. He said he was sorry and hoped everything went okay. That was the last normal interaction I had with him that night. I do not remember the exact moment they took me into surgery. I remember the ceiling lights moving above me. I remember a nurse asking me to confirm my name. I remember being tired. Then I remember waking up. The first thing I noticed was how dry my mouth was. The second thing I noticed was that someone had moved my phone onto a table beside the bed. My mother was sitting in a chair in the corner. She looked like she had been awake for hours. She leaned forward when she saw my eyes open. She told me the surgery had gone well. I was still groggy, so I had no idea what time it was. I asked about my brother because I knew he had said he was worried. My mother became quiet. That should have been my first warning. Instead, I was still too out of it to understand. She told me there had been an accident involving my brother. I remember trying to sit up before realizing that was a terrible idea. She told me his car had been badly damaged. She said he had some cuts and bruises but was alive. I asked whether he had been taken to the same hospital. She said no. Then she told me my father was handling it. That phrase did not mean anything to me at the time. My father was handling it. That was normal in my family. When something went wrong, my father took over. He liked being the person who knew what was happening. He liked making calls. He liked deciding what the next move should be. I assumed he was helping my brother. I did not know that, at almost the exact moment I was waking up from surgery, my father was already trying to create a version of the accident that would protect my brother from the worst consequences. I was discharged later that day. My mother drove me home. My brother came by that evening. He looked awful. He had a bandage near his eyebrow. His hands were scraped. His shirt was the same one I remembered seeing in a photo from earlier that week. He stood in my living room and looked at the floor for several seconds before saying he was sorry. I assumed he meant he was sorry I had been hospitalized. Then he told me he had crashed his car after leaving a friend's house. I asked whether he was okay. He said physically, mostly. I asked what happened. He said he lost control on a wet road and hit a barrier. He told me the police had come. He told me his car had been towed. He told me there might be insurance problems. Nothing about the conversation made me think he wanted me to take the blame. He seemed ashamed. He kept rubbing his hands together. I remember telling him that a wrecked car was replaceable and that he should focus on getting checked out. He nodded. Then he left. I thought the situation was bad but manageable. The next morning, my father came to my apartment. He did not call first. He just knocked repeatedly until I made it to the door. I had barely slept. I was still sore from surgery. I was wearing sweatpants and one of the oldest t-shirts I owned. My father walked in carrying a folder. He put it on my kitchen counter. Then he told me that I needed to cooperate with the police. At first, I thought he meant I should give them whatever information I had. Then he explained what cooperating meant. He wanted me to tell them that I had been driving my brother's car when it crashed. I honestly thought I had misunderstood him. I stared at him. He repeated himself. He said the police needed a clear statement, and the easiest solution was for me to say I had been driving. I asked why they would believe that. He said because the car was my brother's and because there was no reason for me to make things complicated. I reminded him that I had been in the hospital. He said he knew. I reminded him that I had surgery that night. He said he knew that too. Then he told me it did not matter. That was the moment when something inside me shifted. Until then, I had thought my father was desperate and panicked. I suddenly realized he had made a decision. He was not confused. He was asking me to lie. I asked him why I would take a criminal charge for something my brother did. He said I was his brother and I was supposed to help. He told me my brother could lose his job. He told me the insurance could become a disaster. He told me my brother might face much worse consequences if the police believed he had been driving. I asked him what exactly had happened that night. He became vague. That bothered me more than anything. I asked whether my brother had been drinking. My father did not answer directly. He said the important thing was that nobody had died. I remember standing there with one hand on the kitchen counter because I was still sore from surgery and thinking that this conversation was completely insane. My father told me I was making this harder than it needed to be. He said if I just went along with it, the family could put everything behind us. He promised my brother would handle the financial part later. He said they would make sure I was not left with the consequences. None of that made sense. If I admitted to driving, I would be the person legally responsible. I would be the person reporting the incident to insurance. I would be the person explaining why I was driving a car that was not mine. I would be the person facing questions about my condition, my whereabouts, and the accident itself. I asked my father what he expected me to say if the police asked where I had been before the crash. He said I should say I had been out. I asked him where. He did not have an answer. I asked him what time I had left home. He said I could work out the details. That was when I knew he had not thought through the lie. He only wanted me to accept the first part. Everything else was supposed to happen later. I told him I was not doing it. He became angry. He said I was being selfish. He told me my brother needed me. I said my brother needed to tell the truth. My father accused me of acting superior. I told him I was still recovering from surgery and did not have the energy to argue. He picked up his folder and left. I thought that was the end of it. It was not. That afternoon, my brother called me. He did not ask about my recovery. He did not ask whether I was in pain. He asked whether Dad had talked to me. I said yes. He went silent. I asked him what was going on. He said Dad was trying to fix everything. I asked him whether he had been driving. He said yes. I asked whether he had been drinking. There was another long silence. Then he admitted he had been drinking earlier. He said he thought he was fine to drive. He said he only remembered the car starting to slide. He said he was sorry. I told him he had to tell the police the truth. He said he was scared. I said I understood that. Then I said being scared did not give him the right to make me take the blame. He started crying. I had never heard him cry like that before. He said Dad had told him I would help. I asked him why he believed that. He said because I always did. That sentence hurt more than I expected. I had spent years thinking being reliable was a good thing. Suddenly, I realized other people could turn reliability into an obligation. My brother said he did not want me to get in trouble. Then he said he did not know how to fix it. I told him the first step was simple. He needed to tell the truth. He hung up without answering. That evening, I started doing something I had never imagined needing to do against my own family. I gathered records, not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted to build some dramatic case. I just wanted to make sure nobody could later tell me I had agreed to this. I saved the text messages between my brother and me. I took screenshots. I kept the hospital discharge paperwork. I downloaded the patient portal records. I looked at the timestamps. My emergency department check-in was there. The imaging was there. The preoperative notes were there. The anesthesia record was there. The surgery start time was there. The recovery notes were there. Everything lined up. I had entered the hospital before the crash. I had been admitted before the crash. I had been under medical care during the crash, and I was still in the recovery area when the police came to the scene. I did not know yet whether any of that would matter legally. I knew it mattered factually. Then I remembered something else. My phone had been connected to the hospital Wi-Fi that night. I checked my account activity. There were hospital network connections during the entire period. There were also messages I had sent from my bed before the surgery. I had taken a photo of the hospital bracelet because I had texted it to my mother. There were timestamps on that too. It felt almost absurd. I had been so focused on getting through surgery that I had accidentally documented my own alibi in several different ways. The next day, my father called again. He sounded calmer. He said we needed to meet. I said I did not want to. He told me it was about family. I almost agreed anyway. Then I remembered how easily he had dismissed my surgery when he asked me to lie. I told him we could talk over the phone. He said I was being difficult. I said that was fine. He told me my brother had been contacted by the insurance company. He said the police had follow-up questions. I asked whether my brother had told them he was driving. My father did not answer. He just repeated that this could all go away if I cooperated. I told him I would not make a false statement. He said he was disappointed in me. Then he said something that bothered me for days. He told me I would regret forcing my brother to deal with the consequences of one bad decision. At first, I thought that was guilt. Later, I understood it was a warning. The police contacted me 2 days later. An officer asked me to come in and provide a statement about the accident. I almost laughed from nerves when I got the call. I told the officer I was not the driver. The officer said they were aware there was some disagreement about who had been driving. That phrase immediately caught my attention. Some disagreement. I asked how my name had come up. The officer explained that someone had reported that I may have been driving. They did not tell me who had made that claim. I told them I had surgery that night. The officer asked me to bring my hospital records if I had them. I said I did. I showed up with a folder. I felt ridiculous walking into the station carrying medical paperwork like I was preparing for a school presentation. The officer reviewing the case did not seem surprised. They asked me to explain the timeline. I told them everything as simply as I could. I went to the hospital. I was evaluated. I was admitted. I underwent emergency surgery. I remained there during the time of the crash. I had no idea why anyone would think I had been driving. The officer asked whether I knew who had been driving. I said my brother had told me he was driving. I also said he had admitted to drinking earlier that evening. I was careful with that part because I did not want to exaggerate anything. I told them exactly what he had told me, nothing more. The officer reviewed my records. They asked whether they could verify them with the hospital. I said yes. They asked whether I objected to them contacting the hospital. I said no. Then they asked whether I had any texts with my brother. I showed them the messages. I had saved the originals. The officer looked at the one where my brother had texted me from his phone earlier that night wishing me luck with surgery. The time stamp was before the accident. Then they looked at another message I had sent while waiting. Then another. The officer did not say much. They just kept taking notes. Before I left, they told me they would likely have more questions. I asked whether I needed a lawyer. They said I was not under arrest and they could not give me legal advice. That answer was enough for me to call one. I found a local attorney who handled criminal defense and traffic matters. The consultation was not cheap. It was still cheaper than making one reckless decision. The attorney reviewed the records. He told me I should not make any statement without understanding exactly what investigators were alleging. He also told me something that made me feel a little less crazy. He said the hospital records were extremely helpful because they did not rely solely on my memory. A time-stamped medical record created by people who had nothing to gain from my family's situation was much stronger than me simply saying I was somewhere else. That was when I started to understand why my father had been so aggressive. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that his plan depended on nobody checking the details. He needed me to cooperate before anyone looked at the timeline. He needed me to say I was driving before the hospital records were examined. He needed me to make the false statement voluntarily. Once I understood that, his urgency made more sense. A week later, my father came to my apartment again. This time he was not alone. My mother was with him. She looked exhausted. I invited them inside because I did not want another argument in the hallway. My father sat at the kitchen table. My mother sat beside him. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then my mother told me she had seen my hospital records. She said she knew I had been in surgery. I asked why they were still asking me to take the blame. My father said because my brother had already made things worse. I asked what he meant. He admitted my brother had been cited for the crash. He admitted the police were investigating whether alcohol was involved. He said the insurance company was questioning the claim. He also admitted my brother had already told someone that I might have been driving. That was the first time I heard the whole story. My brother had apparently panicked after the crash. He had told the first responding officer that he was unsure how bad the accident was. Later, he had become more concerned about the consequences. My father had then decided the best solution was to say I had been driving. I asked my mother whether she believed that story. She said she knew it was not true. I asked her why she had not stopped them. She started crying. She said she had been afraid of what would happen to my brother. I understood fear. I did not understand letting someone else take the fall. My father said he had only been trying to protect his son. I told him I was his son too. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said that was exactly why he thought I would understand. That was the moment I finally saw how he had justified everything to himself. He had not thought of what he was asking as betrayal. He had labeled it family loyalty. He believed one son could absorb the consequences so another son could recover. He probably thought that made him a good father. I told him that if protecting one child required destroying another child's life, then it was not protection. Nobody answered. My mother asked whether I was going to cooperate with the police. I said yes. I would tell the truth. That was all. My father stood up and said I was making a choice that would permanently damage our family. I told him the damage had already been done. They left. The investigation continued. I was not charged. My brother was. I found that out through my attorney. The specific charges depended on what investigators could establish regarding the crash and alcohol. I did not ask for details beyond what I needed to know. I was angry, but I was not interested in punishing him. I wanted the truth separated from my father's version of it. The hospital records became one of several pieces of evidence. The emergency department check-in showed when I arrived. The surgery record showed when I was taken in. The anesthesia record confirmed I could not have been somewhere else. The recovery notes placed me in the hospital during the relevant period. There were also medication administration records. The timing was so clear that even my attorney looked surprised at how little room there was for argument. Then investigators found something I did not know about. The hospital had security cameras. There was footage showing me arriving. There was footage showing my mother arriving later. There was footage showing medical staff moving me through the hospital. The timestamps aligned with the records. No one had to take my word for it. That was the part that finally ended the argument. Facts are difficult to debate when they come from systems that have no emotional connection to your family. Meanwhile, my brother's situation became more complicated. The insurance company investigated the crash. They asked for statements. They reviewed the police report. They examined the vehicle damage. They eventually challenged some parts of my brother's original account. My father was furious. He called me multiple times. At first, I answered. Eventually, I stopped. Every conversation turned into the same argument. He said I had abandoned my brother. I said I had refused to lie. He said family should stick together. I said family should tell the truth. He said my brother might lose everything. I said he might still recover if he took responsibility. He said I did not understand what one bad night could do to a person. I told him I understood better than anyone because he had tried to make one bad night into my permanent record. My mother eventually stopped defending my father. That happened slowly. She came to my apartment one afternoon with groceries because I was still recovering. She spent an hour helping me put things away. Then she apologized. She said she had known from the beginning that I had been in surgery. She said she had been afraid that refusing my father would make the situation worse. She admitted she had gone along with him because she thought she was keeping the family together. I told her I believed she thought she was doing the right thing. That did not mean it had been right. She nodded. I appreciated the honesty. For the first time in years, I felt like my mother was talking to me without trying to manage the situation. My brother came over several weeks later. He looked completely different, not physically. Emotionally. He sat on my couch and stared at his hands. He said he had been ashamed. He admitted that when Dad first told him I would take the blame, he had not stopped him. That confession was hard to hear. I asked why. He said he was scared. He said he knew he had screwed up. He said he could not imagine losing his job and dealing with criminal charges. He said our father had convinced him that I would do it because I had always helped. I told him that was exactly what made it worse. He said he knew. He told me he was sorry. I believed him. That did not erase what happened, but it mattered. He also told me something I had not known. After the crash, he had called our father before he called anyone else. He had said he needed help. Our father had immediately started asking about who could be blamed. Not whether my brother was injured, not whether anyone else had been hurt, not what actually happened. Who could be blamed? That stayed with me. It explained why my father's first instinct had been to construct a story. He was trying to solve a legal problem like it was a family argument. He thought if he could control the narrative, he could control the consequences. The problem was that the records did not care about the narrative. Neither did the police. Neither did the insurance company. Neither did the hospital. The legal process moved slowly. That was frustrating for everyone. My brother had to deal with court dates. He had to deal with insurance issues. He had to explain the accident to his employer. He had to make arrangements for transportation after his car was totaled. There was no dramatic courtroom scene where everything was resolved in 5 minutes. It was paperwork, appointments, phone calls, fees, deadlines, waiting. He eventually accepted responsibility for his part in the crash. I was told through my attorney that the case had moved forward without me being accused of anything. That was a relief. I still had moments where I wondered whether I had handled everything correctly. I wondered whether I should have agreed to meet my father sooner. I wondered whether refusing to help made me a bad brother. Then I would remember being in that hospital bed. I would remember how weak I felt after surgery. I would remember my father standing in my kitchen and telling me to take the charge. I would remember that he had known I was in the hospital. There was no version of that where I was the person who caused the problem. I was the person they were trying to use to contain it. My father stopped speaking to me for several months. My brother and I had limited contact. My mother continued checking on me. Family gatherings became awkward. Thanksgiving was especially uncomfortable. My father did not come. My brother came late and left early. My mother spent most of the meal trying to pretend things were normal. Nobody really knew what to talk about. I remember someone mentioning football. Someone else complained about grocery prices. My brother asked how my recovery was going. I said I was doing better. That was basically the conversation. The strangest part was that I did not feel victorious. I had imagined that once the truth came out, I would feel some huge rush of relief. Instead, I mostly felt tired. There's nothing satisfying about discovering that your family was willing to sacrifice you to protect someone else, even when the truth proves you were right. I also felt guilty, not because I had done anything wrong, because I had spent so many years thinking my family worked differently. I had ignored little things. The times my brother borrowed money, the times my father covered for him, the times my mother told me to let something go because my brother was struggling. I had noticed them. I just had not connected them. I thought they were isolated incidents. They were not. They were a pattern. I also had to admit that I had helped create that pattern. Every time I quietly solved a problem, I taught everyone that I would solve the next one too. Every time I paid a bill for my brother because he promised to repay me later, I made it easier for him to avoid consequences. Every time I stayed quiet to keep peace, I made peace more important than honesty. The crash did not create that dynamic. It exposed it. Months after the accident, my brother finished the immediate legal process. He had financial consequences. He had to deal with insurance. He had to arrange transportation. He lost some work opportunities. I never asked him for money. I never asked him to repay me for legal expenses. I wanted no part of his punishment. I had one condition for repairing our relationship. He had to stop letting other people speak for him. He agreed. Our relationship improved slowly. Not because everything went back to normal. It did not. We talked more honestly. He stopped pretending things were fine when they were not. He admitted when he was struggling. I stopped automatically fixing problems for him. That was probably the healthiest change between us. My father was different. He remained convinced that I had handled the situation badly. He said I had humiliated the family. He said I should have protected my brother. He never apologized for asking me to lie. At one point, he said the whole thing would have been forgotten by now if I had simply cooperated. I told him that was not true. It would not have been forgotten. It would have been attached to my name, my record, my insurance, my future, my life. I told him I would not carry another adult's consequences just because he was scared. He did not respond. For a long time, I thought that meant he was still angry. Later, my mother told me he had been embarrassed. He had realized the plan had been reckless. He just could not admit it. I understood that too. People can be capable of terrible choices without believing they are terrible people. That does not make the choices acceptable. Eventually, my father and I started speaking again. The relationship was different. I stopped expecting him to approve of my boundaries. I stopped trying to make him understand every decision. I stopped telling him everything. That was not revenge. It was a consequence. Trust is not something somebody gets to demand after breaking it. A year after the crash, I was cleaning out a drawer and found the hospital wristband I had saved. I almost threw it away. Then I laughed at myself. I kept it, not because I wanted to remember the surgery. I kept it because that tiny plastic band represented the most important fact in the entire mess. I knew where I was. The records knew where I was. The hospital knew where I was. The truth did not need me to make it more dramatic. It only needed me not to replace it with a lie. I have thought about that a lot since then. My father believed he could solve the problem by controlling the story. He thought if I said the right thing, the facts would become less important. Instead, the boring things proved everything. A check in time, a medication record, a surgical note, a hospital camera, a text message, a timestamp, a police report, a vehicle record. None of those things cared that we were related. None of them cared who was the favorite. None of them cared who was scared. They just documented what happened. That was what ultimately protected me, not some brilliant legal maneuver, not revenge, not a dramatic confrontation. I simply refused to lie and kept the records that already existed. The most painful part is that I probably could have avoided a lot of the family fallout if I had gone along with my father for even a few days. Maybe he was right about one thing. It might have looked easier at first. I might have bought my brother time. I might have delayed the consequences, but I would have created a much bigger problem for myself. I would have turned a night when my brother made a terrible decision into a permanent lie that belonged to me. Once you put something like that in writing, you cannot easily take it back. You cannot undo an insurance statement because you feel guilty. You cannot erase a false police report because your father promises everything will work out. You cannot explain away a contradiction forever. And eventually somebody asks a simple question. Where were you? In my case, the answer was sitting in a hospital record. The last thing my father ever said to me about that night was that he wished I had understood what he was trying to do. I told him I did understand. I understood that he was scared. I understood that he loved my brother. I understood that he wanted to protect him from consequences. I even understood why part of him believed sacrificing me was an acceptable solution. What I could not accept was that love for one child had become permission to endanger another. That was the line I finally drew. I used to think being the calm person in the family meant absorbing whatever happened. Now I think it means staying calm enough to see when something is wrong. It means asking questions even when the answers are uncomfortable. It means keeping documents when everybody tells you there is no need. It means not confusing loyalty with obedience. Most importantly, it means remembering that telling the truth does not become betrayal just because someone you love does not like the truth. My brother still has consequences from that night. He will probably have some reminder of it for years. But he is alive. Nobody else was seriously injured. He eventually took responsibility. He is doing better now. We have a relationship again. It is not the same relationship we had before, but in some ways it is better because it is finally honest. My mother and I are closer too. My father and I are civil. There are still things we do not discuss. Maybe someday that changes. Maybe it does not. I stopped trying to force it. The strangest thing about the whole experience is that the evidence everyone thought would hurt me ended up being the thing that protected me. My father thought I was hiding behind paperwork. The police saw the paperwork and realized I had been telling the truth. My brother thought I might abandon him. What I actually did was refuse to let his fear destroy both of us. And I learned something I wish I had understood years earlier. When someone asks you to lie because it will only be easier for everyone, ask who exactly is getting the benefit from that lie. Then ask who is carrying the risk. In my situation, the answer was painfully clear. My brother would have gotten the benefit. My father would have gotten the relief, and I would have carried the consequences. The hospital records did not make me brave. They just made it impossible for me to pretend this was normal. I am grateful for that, because if my father had ordered me to take the blame and I had agreed, I would probably still be living with that decision. Instead, I spent a few months dealing with an ugly family conflict. I kept my record clean. I kept my name out of a lie. And eventually the truth did exactly what my father had been trying to prevent. It made everyone face what had actually happened. My brother had been behind the wheel. I had been in a hospital bed. And no amount of family pressure could change either fact.